All right. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for coming out to our first ever in-person town hall. At Reform Alliance, we've started doing our town halls to make sure that we are engaging with all those that are in our community, that they know about the work that we're doing and all the efforts, and even to highlight some of the folks that are working with us and doing great work. But with that, I want to thank our partners at the Athlete's Foot for working with us and partnering with us on this town hall and so many others for their great work in the community and being great community partners with us. So first of all, I would like everyone to give the Athlete's Foot a round of applause for supporting us in this venture. My name is Britton Smith, and I am the Senior Director of Membership at Reform Alliance. And a little bit about Reform. We are a national organization focused on changing the probation and parole system around the country. With so many individuals who are caught up in this system, we focus on making sure that there are tangible pathways to successful reentry. So we do this by changing the culture and changing legislation. So shout out to the reform team that's on site here and all the reform team across the country and all of the reformers who have signed up to work with us and help us through all of these endeavors. It's good for us to be back here in Georgia, back here in Atlanta. Got a couple of Atlanta products who have been doing great work in their own space. But it's important for us as we were here and we worked in 2021 with Georgia Justice Project and so many other organizations to get some good tangible legislation started, get the ball rolling in the space with SB 105. And thank you to, of course, all of our authors and all of the legislators who saw fit for it to be a necessary effort to undertake and a great launching point for us. So we'll hear more about the work through SB 105 and through work with GJP, Georgia Justice Project. But first, I want to introduce someone who is a homegrown product, who is making waves on the scene now. He's produced for Future, Roddy Ricch, High Boys, so many others, a real rising superstar in the music industry. I mean, go figure, Atlanta have some music industry, right? So another new face and name that is taking the music industry by storm. I want to introduce Mr. ATL Jacob.
What's up, y'all? How y'all doing?
And next on our panel, we have Ms. Elizabeth Rainwater, who is the Environmental Works Fellow for Georgia Justice Project. She does great work, has helped us, not just at Reform, but so many in our community with the concept and the conversation around community supervision. So I want to introduce to everyone, Ms. Elizabeth Rainwater. So first, AT, I want to go to you and ask you, growing up in Atlanta, seeing some of the things you did, as you did growing up, what got you into looking and seeing the need for some type of change and helping out your community in the ways you do?
It's just like growing up, I got friends that's in prison or that went to jail, mostly everybody. So it's like seeing how, like, because of his situation, they treated his sentencing different from others when they all could be on the same charge, or even like with artists on my label. That's like, I got one incarcerated now, and like everybody been to prison and jail before. So it's like just knowing that, like, man, this gotta change. It's just seeing it around me.
Awesome. And I can understand, of course, so many of us have friends, loved ones that we've seen be literally involved in the justice system the majority of their lives. Of course, when you start talking about the founding of reform, we talk about McMill's situation about being on probation his entire adult life. And so seeing the need in that community and you working with so many of your friends and so many others that you know are in that same situation, that's really noble of you, and definitely appreciate you coming here tonight to lend your voice to this conversation. Elizabeth, tell us more about your work with GJP and how you guys are engaged in this space.
Yeah, hey everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. So my name is Elizabeth Rainwater, and I started at Georgia Justice Project, which is a nonprofit that does criminal defense. We do record expungement and policy change in the Georgia area. So we're just in Old Fourth Ward, not too far from here. But I actually started at GJP in 2020 as an Equal Justice Works Fellow, and the focus of my fellowship, my project, so to speak, was probation reform, felony probation reform. So I can definitely get into more details in a minute, but as many of y'all here know, Georgia unfortunately leads the nation in the highest rate of correctional control, and specifically when it comes to felony probation. We sentence people longer, we sentence people more frequently, and so that's why this fellowship really started. And now that my fellowship's over, I'm now staff attorney with Georgia Justice Project, and we are continuing that work in probation reform because the issue is still there in Georgia. Still has we still got a lot of steps we can take to move forward.
ATL, you talked about earlier when we were in the back about your passion in music, and of course, teased you earlier about just being such a producer, making a beat out of anything, and how music kept you out of trouble growing up. Would you mind sharing that story and sharing that?
It's just, seeing my environment with even the people I'm going to school with, they stealing cars, robbing and just doing everything to get in trouble. Just people even if I wasn't hanging out with them, just people around me, it just made me nah, I'm gonna just do this music, stay out the way. Oh, he going to go do this? I'm going to the house, gonna make beats.
And so how were you able to convince even some of your peers that you knew to come along with you on that journey to stay out of trouble and utilize music as an outlet as opposed to anything else that they can get their hands on in the community?
Now I'll tell all of them, you ain't gotta be doing this, you can be making music. Even if you don't want to make beats, you can rap. If you don't want to rap, make beats. If you don't want to do either, go act. If you don't want to do that, go do some art or something, because we all talented. You just got to bring it out.
That's awesome, and it's impressive to hear that. One from someone so young and have that perspective. So definitely kudos to your mom. I know she's out here in the audience. So, but another thing is for you to realize that and see potential in so many of your peers when we see a system that sees something else in them. And so that's very admirable of you. Elizabeth, you pursued a career in law. How have you, and what inspired you to utilize that lane to advocate for so many people in our communities?
Yeah, that's something we could sit here all night and chat about, but we got other things to discuss. So I'll give y'all the elevator pitch here. I went to law school very reluctantly. I didn't want to be a lawyer because from where I stood, the criminal legal system is so corrupt and so broken. And through a lot of wisdom from people who have lived life a lot longer than me, they said, at some point you can either be a critic or you can put skin in the game. And I figured, I'm spending a lot of energy sitting on the sidelines being a critic. I might as well put skin in the game. And why criminal defense specifically? Unfortunately, living in the South, it's painfully obvious. I think it's pervasive everywhere, but in the South, growing up, my parents taught me most important thing in the world to do is to love your neighbor, and loving your neighbor means meeting them where they're at and stepping in where the world has chosen to step out and leave people hung out to dry. For me, I saw that most clearly through our criminal legal system, people being left hung out to dry, people being left behind even after they're out of the, which is why probation is such a huge issue, after they're out of jail or out of prison, still being left hung out to dry. So again, it's time to put skin in the game, and that's kind of how I got there.
Absolutely. And in as I mentioned earlier, in 2021, we came down, Reform Alliance came down to work with Georgia Justice Projects and so many other organizations here in Georgia in support of Senate Bill 105. Elizabeth, can you tell us how Senate Bill 105 is working to benefit so many people here in Georgia?
Absolutely. And like I said at the beginning of this, part of why this was such a huge issue in Georgia, the probation reformation, is because we have so many folks on felony probation, and not just so many people getting sentenced, but so many people getting sentenced for a long time. So over 60% of folks who are on felony probation are serving 10-year plus sentences. That's really, I mean, I've worked with folks who have 25 years, 30 years of felony probation, which come with a lot of barriers. So Senate Bill 105, SB 105, what it did was it allowed everyone who was serving a felony probation sentence in Georgia to be able to access early termination of probation after serving 3 years. And really, I won't get too nitpicky here, but as long as someone hasn't had their probation revoked in the prior 24 months, they've paid restitution, not fines and fees, just restitution if there was any, and no new arrests besides traffic offenses aren't going to do anything to you. Then they're eligible for early termination. And like I said, since so many people in Georgia are serving these really lengthy sentences, that was huge. That bill, when it was passed, impacted about 50,000 Georgians who were serving sentences that exceeded those 3 years and could be eligible for it. And I can talk a little bit about like kind of what's happening now. Is that where you want me to go there? Yeah. So I'm a talker, y'all. I'm sorry. I like to give a lot of detail. So don't encourage me. So we have seen baseline, we've seen probation numbers significantly drop. DCS, that's Department of Community Supervision, who oversees felony probation and parole in Georgia, they're going to be releasing data this year that can kind of give us some more specific to that. But what I will say is we know that upon SB 105 passing, Georgia Justice Project started through my fellowship and also just through our legal team started opening avenues to help make sure people knew about the bill, because as Reform talks about, I'm sure, and as y'all know, getting the bill passed is step one. We got to make sure people know it applies to them. We got to make sure they know how it works. We got to empower people to know I can stand up and speak and call my probation officer and have these conversations. So a huge part of the implementation was getting the word out, making sure people feel confident and understand what's happening, making sure probation officers understand, which DCS created a whole one-pager just on this bill to inform their officers. They created an early termination email just for folks who were experiencing issues with this new bill and if they had questions about it. So we've seen a lot of implementation efforts, and the fruit of that has been not just people getting off of probation, but people being able to not have to go through an attorney, not having to, hire someone else, but to be able to go through it and empower themselves to have those conversations and know how that works.
And it's important to note that through the passage, and in order to, as a matter of fact, realize the passage of SB 105, that it took coalition building, and it was truly a bipartisan effort in that. And that's something that we pride ourselves here at Reform, working with all groups on the left, on the right, in the center, because we know that, one, this is an issue that it affects so many people and affects millions of people, of course, across the country. But we know that this is something that everybody can relate to. We know a relative, friend, loved one, and it's a genuine interest for smart public safety. So it's definitely to note that part of the policy change really came through with that bipartisan push and the coalition building. And another thing that we focus on in Reform is making sure that we really impress the idea of wealth building and stable job creation. And one of the things I want to throw back to you, Jacob, about is how you see the opportunities that you're giving a lot of your peers and your friends. Not only are you giving them something to do, but you're giving them an opportunity to build wealth, to create something for their families. So talk about that mindset and what you were even thinking about for your friends.
It's a mindset, that you can't learn. It's a mindset you got to be born with, though. And that's just what I learned from like different people who do different things, who I tell not tell, but more just give advice and direction on what to do if you don't know what to do. And it's like, it's nothing that can be taught. It's just something that you just gotta have, which is drive.
Where do you think we can improve some of the, economic barriers and especially for a lot of folks in your community? Where do you think we can improve those things in Atlanta?
More of like, my bad. Like it's like definitely in the kids and in the schools, start there because it's the way that you taught and brought up. So that's where improvement can always start there in the kids of what they see and what they learn, what they hear.
That makes perfect sense, of course, utilizing those school systems, utilizing that. Like I said, I had to give a shout out to your mom for making sure that you were on that path to realize something better and something stable. And so, Elizabeth, from a public safety perspective, why are the networks and creating those pathways to stable employment so important?
Yeah, so there's this catch-22 of if folks are employed, they're less likely, it reduces recidivism rate. So there's also on the other end, though, if you have a record, not even just, let's say you finish your probation sentence, let's say you have a record though, that therefore impacts and rather prevents the likelihood of you being able to access stable employment. So we know that employment allows folks to reduce recidivism rates, but we also know that it's hard when you're coming out of jail, prison, or again, even on probation or parole to access stable employment, not just stable employment, but sustainable employment. That's the kicker there. So I think it's like 60% of folks who are coming out of prison within a year, they're not able to have employment. And that's not because they're not trying. It's because about 90% of jobs in Georgia require a background check. And we know that 99% of people coming out of prison are going to be on probation. So it goes both ways.
Absolutely. And before we even get to the question and answer portion from the audience, Jacob, I want to ask you, why do you support Reform's mission, and what would you say to your fans and your followers and listeners just about supporting a movement like this?
I mean, the movement definitely on the right path if he's talking paths. So it's like, I see the vision, I just believe in it, of what y'all trying to do, which is like bring a better system to the system that's already there. So it's like, to my friends and family and my peers, or just anybody watching, like, if you believe in what they say or like what they're trying to do in their vision, because you may know someone who's in the system or who just in the system, period, whether they're incarcerated or not, or on probation. It's like, if you believe in it, handle that.
Yeah, sign up and join Reform. I didn't say it, Jacob said it.
Sign up and join Reform. I ain't know what to say.
you good. We work well together, man. I'll bill you later. And Elizabeth, how can Georgia serve as a model for other states to implement some of these same programs that we were just talking about and some of these same ideas that we were discussing?
Well, I'm going to quote you for the first part of that answer. It's partnerships, right? Relationships matter. It takes a village. That's not news for us, but I would say it's really important anytime we do reform, criminal legal reform, sorry, I don't want to mix up the words there, that we're always amplifying the voices of those who are directly impacted. So it's not people who are unimpacted sitting in a room coming up with our own, what we think are bright ideas, but it's amplifying the voices of those who experience it. It's hearing out people's loved ones who walk with folks who are directly impacted through this process. It's working with individuals like Reform did with us who are familiar with the systems, right? The way Georgia works is different from the way California works, and we could keep going. So people who know the system, most importantly, who are amplifying voices for the people who are most impacted by this, and partnerships, I would say. It takes a village to do any of this.
And if you could highlight one thing that we can do as a community to better support, better realize these changes, given where the implementation stages are now, what would you think would probably be the first best step or the next best step?
I'm always gonna, I wish our community outreach director was here, because I'm always gonna say education, is gonna be the biggest thing. It shocked me to realize how much stalling can happen just because people don't know. People don't know what's going on. I don't just mean people directly impacted folks. I mean probation officers, I mean criminal defense attorneys, I mean prosecutors, I mean judges. To not think just because we got something passed that it's now all out there and everything's smooth sailing. No, there's work. It takes work to make a good thing keep happening. And it's a great thing that there's legislative reform, but to keep on educating each other and not feel like you have to be an expert to talk about it. Go to organizations that, we've got, I know Reform does this, Georgia Justice Project does this. We create materials so that folks can feel comfortable and confident sharing the news. So I say, talk about it, start having conversations. Don't think you're disqualified because you don't have a legal degree. I mean, again, I think community voices matter way more than the people who are sitting behind signing the bill or drafting it.
And so with that, I'm going to take the opportunity for a shameless plug for reform. So you heard Jacob say it. Go to reformalliance.com to sign up to become a reformer. And just as Elizabeth was explaining, this is where we can utilize everyone to, tell your story. Because again, that matters, that carries so much weight in this space. Attend some of these events like the good people that are joining me here in Atlanta. And also stay abreast of all the work we're doing wherever we are with our newsletters and all our various forms of outreach. We got a team that works so hard and diligently on those newsletters, and they do great work. So shout out to our folks running our newsletter, and everything that we're doing at Reform. But not only that, the partners that we're working with, so we can highlight whether they're allied groups that we've either already worked with or planning to work with. We want to stay connected and in community. So again, thank you for that segue to make me do a shameless plug. So with that, I wanted to give a brief moment, an opportunity for anyone in the audience to ask any questions. We have, of course, a very influential voice and the subject matter expert, and then me. So of course, anyone, if they have a question, we have a microphone coming through.
We got a couple people who are joining, more than a couple people who are joining virtually. So I'd like to bring them into the room with us. Just I'll alternate back and forth. So feel free to raise your hand if you're in the room, drop it in the chat if you were online. First question, I think it's probably for Britton, which is how does being on probation affect your right to vote?
That's awesome. So the right to vote, and it's such a unique thing, and I always talk about this, about the significance and importance of voting, and the restoration of rights is such an essential part of everyday life. I say voting is the epitome of hope. You go to the ballot box and you're literally hoping for an outcome, whether it's your candidate wins, whether your issue stands. It is the direct symbol of hope. And so when you have individuals who have been disenfranchised and don't have that opportunity to cast a vote, they literally don't have that opportunity to hope in the same system that they find themselves victim in. And so that is why, of course, at Reform Alliance, we work with so many organizations who are pushing for the restoration of rights, who are pushing for the education of the restoration of rights, because of course it looks different in so many different places, and what people need to do to realize this and how important that hope means to so many different people. So I think they are closely related, and they definitely tie, as it is a true symbol of a pathway, not just to success, sustainable success, but to hope in that society.
What does that like? Whether you can vote on probation or not is dependent on the state that you're in. So I don't know what the situation is in Georgia. I don't know, Elizabeth.
Generally speaking, if you're serving a felony sentence in Georgia, including on probation, you can't vote.
But check with your Secretary of State's office. We got another question from the audience.
Well, one, I'd like to say, not that he needs anyone to vouch for him, but Britton, I have known about him since 2009 when I stepped on my college campus everybody was B. Smith, B. Smith, B. Smith for president. And so he's on his way.
She is not a plant.
No, I actually probably haven't seen him since he graduated. It's like 2009 or 10. Yeah, but so it's nice to see you still doing what you left the campus doing. So
Yeah, I grade a little bit.
my question is actually for ATL Jacob, but it's coming off of something that Elizabeth said about how the community kind of dictates how things go, and it just kind of it just serves as a foundation of how certain people in communities view things. ATL Jacob, you're a phenomenal producer. Super Gremlin is probably one of the most perfect songs ever. And
Thank you.
what you did to Wait For You, criminal, ridiculous. But as someone who is working with very influential artists, some of the most influential artists, Kodak Black, Future, in a time like this, we see what's going on with YSL. How do you position yourself to kind of serve as a medium, right, to help propel these type of things forward? Are these conversations that you're having with those artists? And not to say that you're in a studio, they're doing their thing and they're like, hey, bro, maybe don't talk about codeine in this song, but what are you, do you have some sort of method to kind of hold your peers accountable with the work that you do and the music that you are putting out? Because ATL Jacob is, sometimes I go to sleep after the club and I hear it. So.
Well, honestly, you like movies and actors, right? So I look at music as telling the story or acting or doing something. So it's not like, feel like the way like when Young Thug, Future, everybody, like they're not putting in their songs telling you to go do this and that. It's more of just a audible, but more like a movie you listening to, more of that. So when they do talk about certain things, it's like all it is just a movie that's not PG-13. So it's like people, I mean, for like people to actually listen to it, to go and be like, I'm gonna do this because they doing it. But what if they just telling a story that, what if the song is scripted? So it's like, you're not gonna go watch, the Jeffrey Dahmer documentary and start eating people. So I still look at it like that. So I just don't dictate anything that an artist does, because at the end of the day, they doing their job and they just telling stories.
And keeping it in context of just the space that you're reflecting an art form versus directly coaching a lifestyle. So
right, it's more, they're not coaching you to go do these things like some whatever you hear in the songs. They're not coaching you to go do that. It's more of they just telling the story.
Understood. Alex?
Yep, we got a question from Noel from Miami, Florida. And he's saying, is there anything that can be done around licensing, occupational licensing? People who want to become, I know Noel, he's a real estate agent, but when he was on probation, he couldn't get his real estate license, so he got off. So is there work being done to allow that, break down that barrier for people?
So I can only speak to Georgia, but I'll say that, yes, agreed, that is a huge issue. One of the significant barriers for folks on probation is that they can't get an occupational license because of all these rigid standards. But part of the work that we're doing at Georgia Justice Project, we actually brought in a fellow, Emmy Williams, who is focused exclusively on occupational licensing issues. And working on, that's kind of our campaign for this next legislative season, is getting Georgians back to work. How can we reduce barriers for folks who are serving on a sentence or have some sort of record that is creating a barrier for them in occupational licensing? So that's work that we're doing. Emmy Williams is a staff attorney now and is focusing on that. And I think that there's certainly room for reform there, not just in Georgia.
And to what, even some of the work that we're doing, of course, occupational licensure was something that we looked at in Iowa. And so shout out to our amazing policy team because we understand that this is one of those barriers, the opportunity to work, the opportunity to pay back these fines and fees and restitution and just making sure that we're eliminating such a crippling factor within that criminal justice system and within that means to a pathway to success.
Opportunity, I know you had your hand up earlier. Did you have a question?
Yes, I don't know, pretty loud.
Yeah. There's people online who want to hear too.
Okay, a couple things. So I'm a formerly incarcerated person. I served almost 11 years in federal prison. President Clinton commuted my sentence, and then later President Obama granted a pardon request that I submitted. I'm currently an attorney. I used to work in the public defender's office. So I have a big shout out to Georgia Justice Project. You guys are doing great work. I thank the reformer for the work that you all are doing as well. I think one of my biggest issues now is excessive punishment, right? And I think that all of this falls under that when you're talking about the amount of time that people are receiving on probation or parole, right? Or even the sentences that they receive when they're in court. And there's something that you touched on as well, Jacob, when you talked about how some people get certain sentences and other people don't, and it kind of, they do the same thing. My brother is in Minnesota, right, which is a different state. We're dealing with state law in this particular instance with him, but he's been locked up for 27 years for first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder. But one of the issues, he has life with the possibility of parole, which I thank God for that. He has a hearing coming up in December in Minnesota. But the issue is that the judge sentenced him to a consecutive sentence, right? Which was an additional 15 years. So when we talk about these excessive sentences, that's one of the things that we have to look at, right? From the gate, that when people are getting sentenced, and we know how that impacts our community more than any other community, and it doesn't stop with just the person who's incarcerated. It impacts all of us, our family members, kids, you know, and I mean, the list goes on and on. I think that is one of the things on the front end that we also have to all, you know, work towards as a community and make our voices heard about the excessive sentences that people are getting going in, right? So even if you're going to be held accountable for something that you may do or whatever, it still has to be fair and equal, right? On the back end of that, when you're talking about parole and you're talking about probation, and you have these lengthy sentences of, like, even when you're talking about parole, and Barry's going to speak in a minute about his case, you're looking at people that got like 15 years parole, and then it's 15 more years probation. And I mean, this is a person's whole life. You know, people are getting sentences out here. They're throwing it out like it's candy, but it's not. So when you tell me you're going to give somebody 30 years, that's a lifetime. You know what I mean? It's a lifetime. It's the time it takes for a child to be born, to grow up, graduate from high school, graduate from college, live their life, and develop and have a family of their own. But people throw that time out, and that's another thing. And I'm not going to keep talking forever because I do talk a lot. I'm with you on that, right? But just the fact that when you talk about coalition building, it's not just, you know, the community or the public defenders or Georgia Justice. The DA's office has to be involved in this as well, because they have to make sure that they're asking for reasonable things if in fact they have the evidence that supports what they're charging, right? You can't come in here and think, you know, 30 years, that's somebody's life, that's somebody's child, grandchild, father, brother, cousin, you know? So anyway, again, thank you all for all the work that you're doing. I'm committed along with Barry, and I think everybody who's here is committed to working towards this sort of change. And if I may pass the mic.
Yeah, real quick, please. Yeah.
I'm not that long-winded. Thank you. I appreciate you guys. So I'm dealing with the situation right now. I'm on parole, probation. Served almost 5 years in prison, a state charge for trafficking charge, non-violent. And I'm dealing with a lot of problems with my parole and probation right now. Been home in January to be 3 years. I need help because I have a good job. I'm working, doing good, doing everything I'm supposed to do. It's a headache for me. I'm talking about, I feel like I'm still incarcerated. Even like talking about it now, it's like, it's Senate Bill 105, how does it affect parole? Because it's a headache. I need help. I just need help.
So, yes, like heard, it does not, Senate bill does not affect parole because, and I mean, you know, this, the parole, the Board of Pardons and Parole, obviously they get to decide parole versus the courts deciding probation. So there isn't an overlap in that one bill. I agree. There needs to be reform with parole. I agree with that. And I wish I could say more. I want to see Georgia change there. But Senate Bill 105 only speaks to parole, like, but exactly to the point of if you get 15 years parole and then 15 years probation, that's, I mean, you're out, but you're still serving that whole time, and that's a lifetime. And yeah.
That's what they gave. They gave you 10 years parole, 15 years probation, $500,000 fine. It's like,
Well, see, and I think that's to your point when you asked about Senate Bill 105, when you start doing the legislation that starts to make sense, that you get people to buy in on, these are things that we can build upon. So we know that, one, there's more work to do. Two, that the work has already started and begun. While we celebrate the incremental win in Senate Bill 105, we also know that now we have a starting place and now there's more work to do. We can build upon that, and that now is the new call for us to even look to possibilities within the legislature in the coming years. So, way to give Elizabeth and I some homework. So.
We got to work it out for us. Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure.
Two more?
Two more. Yeah, we got some.
In person. Online, we got it. How can the community take back against violence, take back and create more jobs, create more opportunities for itself?
Anybody want to take that first? Yeah.
My bad. Say it again.
Like how can the community come together to stop violence and to create more opportunities for each other?
I mean, stopping violence, there's more, in the end, it comes to internal thing, but you can promote positivity and you can still see what people take from it. But violent and just, it's an energy that's just internal that sometimes everybody can't control. You can only try to influence positivity, but to actually stop violence, you'll have to physically stop the violence. But to, like, you know, actually try to control their energy to make them non-violent, that's an internal thing that a lot of people have within them. Not saying that they have anger issues or anything, but everybody's human and everybody is completely different from the next person. So it's like everybody reacts different, like the same way you got chemicals that react to different chemicals. So it's more of a thing like promoting positivity to try and stop violence. It's you can't look at it as bad, but it's a hit or miss.
So as our producer scientist in residence says, as he said earlier, educating our community, because he talked about the need for us working in the schools and having some of these conversations that are really affecting. It's sad where you can look at people who are in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade and ask them, you know, raise your hands if you know anyone who's ever been to jail. And a classroom full of kids will raise their hands. And we're not addressing those traumas for 8-year-olds, for 9-year-olds. So even the ways we have these conversations, it's great to have them at the very educated and degreed levels with adults, but understanding the trauma for the generations to come who live in these communities, and also highlighting the work of a lot of the community groups that are doing that. We worked in several states with so many local groups who are trying to address the holistic family need and the family ideas, which will yield those results to stop the violence and encourage those positivities that can be reinforced through your music. And even simply some of the things that you're doing by being a job creator within your own community, by being a person of influence and a role model. You know, there's so many kids now who are looking to be the next ATL Jacob. And so that in itself is one of those means, but again, having those conversations with the people directly impacted. And we always talk about the folks who are systems impacted, and then looking at those families, because of course, as you mentioned, we talk about 30 years, that's long enough for someone to never realize, never seen their grandfather, never seen, to only know and hear stories about these individuals and what impact that has on the community at large. So highlighting those players and partners who are doing some of that work, and then of course encouraging some of our young folks to aspire to be those job creators. Because again, I have to give you kudos to just having that mindset to say, not only am I going to produce, my way out, I'm going to make sure that I'm giving opportunities for someone else to take their family to a whole new plateau.
So your comment actually leads to my next question. Is there any work being done around juvenile justice, juvenile detention, and juvenile probation as deep as a problem that this is for adults? The juvenile justice system is that much more dirty. It needs to be reformed in the utmost ways. Any comments about work being done around juvenile justice?
Yeah, you want to start?
Well, yeah, so I'll say at Georgia Justice Project, we haven't dived into juvenile justice specific, certainly not because we don't see a need for change there. We represent folks who are juveniles and who have been impacted, and their sentences have carried over and impacted their current sentences now. That's not an area we dived into specifically, but certainly not because there's a lack of need.
With reform, one of the things, because we're a national organization and we physically can't be everywhere and in every community, one of the things we always like to do is highlight those partners, those coalitions that we work with who are doing some of that work and amplifying them through our work. And so if you're definitely following us, following some of the things you'll do, you'll definitely see a lot of those groups that do some of the juvenile justice. And of course, if anybody out there doing the work is watching, we are open to working with you and supporting your work and your efforts as you really look to repair and rebuild our community. So before we get out of here, this was an amazing talk, an amazing conversation, necessary, hopefully one of many more that we'll be having in separate segments. But Elizabeth, are there any closing thoughts you want to leave our friends with?
Well, anytime you give me a chance to talk. I would say thank y'all sincerely for those joining online and for those who took time out of your day. I know y'all have routines, y'all got things to do, for taking time to say this is important and this conversation matters. Thank you. Please, I know it's exhausting to stay in this work and to even care and to sit here to some degree, take something from you. But I hope that y'all feel that you're not alone just looking around in this room, that you would look around and see you're not alone in this fight, that you have people, you have allies here. And if y'all are, I'm imagining many of y'all, most of y'all are from the Atlanta area. If there are ways you want to get involved in your community, raise awareness, or if there are ways that you think the Georgia Justice Project, areas that you want us to learn more about, or just want to learn what we're about, please don't be a stranger. And just, thank y'all.
Jacob, anything?
My bad. Definitely, I'm not too deep into every bit of information. So most of the information, you can ask her or ask him. But I just appreciate you for having me being here. And everybody just, if you want to get reformed and go ahead, join and turn your life, make your life a little easier.
Again, he said it, not me. Join reform. I can't make it any simpler. So join reformalliance.com, sign up to become a reformer. I've enjoyed this conversation. Was that one more? I think, hold on.
Yeah, so, let me just speak, I'll just speak for what we do. We employ Georgia Justice Project social workers who work alongside our attorneys. We say that we call it holistic criminal defense. It's not like the attorney's work is more important or the social workers for a partnership, because like you said, the trauma people experience, not just before they were in custody, but during it. I hear the amount of times I hear the words self-diagnosed PTSD from being in prison. I have heard that so many times, it's real. So, yeah, like that is a significant need social services. So thank you for what you do and thank you for bringing that up. That's heavy work and it's absolutely needed. And we say at Georgia Justice Project, anyone who's going through the criminal legal system or who has gone through it needs that support. Yeah, so
Hey,
see
there we
me
go.
after if you want to put it in. That's great, thank you.
There we
Yeah.
go. Making connections happen. That we couldn't end on a better note. So again, thank you all for your time. Thank you all for your energy. And again, again, I definitely want to thank the Athletes for the work that you all are doing in this partnership and in this community at large. And again, reformalliance.com, Jacob said it, reformalliance.com, join the movement, become a reformer. Thank you all. Have a good night.